A pleasant day to everyone. We are the Group 2 reporting Unit 2 Spanish Colonization to the Present. Lesson 1 Chronicles about the 16th century Filipinos, the first voyage around the world and the customs of the Tagalogs. Antonio Pigafetta lived sometimes between 1491 and 1531. Hailed from Vicenza, he was an Italian scholar and explorer who belonged to a rich family. This allowed him to have the means to study astronomy, geography, and cartography. Being a member of a rich and influential family, Pigafetta was able to make his way and become the chronicle of the Magellan expedition. He was among the 18 crew members who were able to return to Spain out of the approximately 270 crew members of the ill-fated expedition. Pigafetta's account is a primary source because he was with Magellan during the expedition. The account narrated Magellan's expedition from its launching until its return to Spain. The account narrated Magellan's arrival in the Philippines, his initial exploit, the friendship he established with the natives, and his eventual death. The account also includes the subsequent trials that the surviving crew endured before they were able to return to Spain. To scholars, Pigafetta's account serves as an important eyewitness account on the first circumnavigation of the globe. 4 known manuscripts or versions of Pigafetta's account are enlisted in the following below. Ferdinand Magellan's expedition left Seville, Spain on August 10, 1519, although their actual voyage started on September 20, 1519. There were 5 ships that comprised his fleet. These were the Victoria, Concepcion, San Antonio, Santiago, and Trinidad, along with some 270 crew members. On October 21, 1520, after more than a year of naval voyage, Magellan was able to discover a passage which connects 2 great bodies of water, the Atlantic and the newly discovered Pacific Ocean. On March 16, 1521, they were able to land in the island of Samar. On April 14, 1521, a mass was officiated in Cebu, and a cross was once again erected as a sign of conquest of the land. Not all of the chieftains in Cebu wanted to establish friendship with Magellan. Lapu-Lapu, the chief of Mactan, refused to accept the Spaniards. A group of 60 men arrived in Mactan on April 27, 1521. A poisoned arrow hit Magellan on his leg. It was only then he ordered a retreat. A bamboo lance then hit his arm, while a javelin struck his back, causing him to fall facing downwards. The surviving crew of the voyage requested that the body of Magellan be handed to them, which unfortunately the natives denied. For them, the body was an accolade and a symbol of their valor and victory. Out of the 270 original crew members of the expedition, only 18 along with 4 Indians survived the journey. The author of the Customs of the Tagalogs is Juan de Plasencia, a Franciscan friar who came from Extremadura, Spain. He is among the first batch of missionaries who came to the Philippines in 1578. He became the custos or superior of the Franciscans in the Philippines from May 23, 1584 until 1588. He later died in Laguna in 1590. Back of the document, written in Nagcarlan, Laguna and finished on October 21st, 1589. The Costumbres de los Tagalos, Customs of the Tagalogs, was among the first series of accounts were written by various fair missionaries and colonial officials during the early years of Spanish occupation in the Philippines. Experts taken from the document. On government and social organization, the Tagalogs were ruled by their chiefs, called by them as datos, spelling in the account. They governed and served them as their captains in times of war. Next to the datos were the maharlikas, or nobles, who were required to accompany the datos or the dato, especially in times of war. This was their main duty, especially because they were not required to pay taxes or tributes. Next were the commoners, which
Plasencia referred to as the aliping na mamahay. The last level belonged to the slaves. Plasencia identified them as aliping sa goyguerel or gorgilid, who were usually the captives in war and enslaved together with their children. The difference between the aliping na mamahay and the aliping sa gigiler should be noted because in page 108 of the book, a confusion between the two terms was encountered.
On marriage, these are the different situations concerning marriage among the Mahalikas, aliping na mamahay at aliping sa goyguler. Situation 1. Those who were considered Mahalikas both on their paternal and maternal side could continue to enjoy their status forever. If, for instance, they became slaves, it happened because of marriage. Situation 2. If the Mahalikas had children among their slaves, the children and their mothers would be considered free men. Situation 3. If the Mahalikas and had children with the female slaves of another Mahalika, the female slave would be compelled when pregnant to give her master half of the gold tile because of her risk of death and for her inability to work during pregnancy. Situation 4. If a free woman had children by a slave, the children would be regarded as free men provided that he was not the free woman's husband. Situation 5. If a mahalika and a slave, whether namamahay or sagilir, married, their children would be classified according to birth order. Odd birth order would inherit the status of the father, while the even birth order would inherit the status of the mother. After marriage, the mahalikas could not move from one barangay to another without paying a certain amount of fine in gold. The fine ranged from 1 to 3 tiles and also a banquet sponsored for the entire barangay.
Loans. The debtors were condemned to a life of toil because of the excessive interest added to their debts. As a result, debtors were plunged into difficulty until they became slaves together with their children. Inheritance. Though legitimate children could inherit equally, there were some situations wherein the mother or father showed favoritism by bestowing more gold or gifts to a child. Inheritance of adaptation or adopted children. The adopted child could inherit twice of the amount paid in his adoption. For example, if 1 tael of gold was paid upon a child's adoption, he should be given 2 taels of inheritance by the adopting parents thereafter. Investigations and punishments. Investigations made and sentences passed by the dato should take place in the presence of the people of the barangay. If any of the litigants felt aggrieved, an arbiter would be anonymously chosen from another village or barangay, be he a dato or not. Marriage dowries. Dowries were given by the men to the woman's parents. If the parents were still alive, they could enjoy the dowry given to them. If the dowry was not consumed by the parents because of death of the parents, the wife and her siblings would equally inherit it in addition to the rest of the state.
The pre-colonial Filipinos practiced divorce, contrary to what the present Filipinos have. Until the coming of Spaniards, divorce was practiced due to certain grounds. For instance, when the wife left the husband before giving birth to a child for the purpose of marrying another, the entire dowry would go to the husband. And when the husband and the wife had a child, the entire dowry and fine would go to the child. Plasencia noted the absence of temples consecrated for the performance of sacrifices, the adoration of native idols, and the general practice of idolatry in all the villages or in other parts of archipelago, although the Tagalogs used the term simbahan, which meant a temple or place of adoration. On the Tagalog deities, among their idols, there was one called Bathala, whom they especially worshipped. The title seems to signify all-powerful or maker of all things.
Their superstitious beliefs. If they left their house and met on the way a serpent or a rat or a bird called tigmamanugin, which was singing on a tree, or if they chanced upon anyone who sneezed, they returned at once to their houses. Their knowledge of time. The natives have had no established division of years, months, and days. These were determined by the cultivation of the soil, their counting by the moons, and the different effect produced upon the trees which yielding flowers, fruits, and leaves. Their sacrifices and other forms of idolatries. Their manner of offering a sacrifice was to proclaim a feast and offer to the devil that they had to eat. This was done in front of the idol which they anointed with fragrant perfumes such as musk and civet, or gum of the storax tree and other odoriferous woods.
The priest of the devil. The first one was called Katulunan, who was either a man or a woman. The second was called Mananangway, or witches, who deceived by pretending to heal the sick. The third was called Manyisalat, which was the same as the witches. The fourth was called Mankukulam, whose duty was to emit fire from himself at night once or often each month. The fifth one was called Pokluban, which was another kind of witch of greater efficacy than the witches or mangangaway. The sixth was called Silagan, who was clothed in white to tear up his liver and eat it, thus causing the victim's death. The seventh was called Magtatanggal, whose purpose was to show himself at night to many persons without his head or entrails. The eighth they called Aswang, which was the equivalent of a sorcerer. The ninth was called a witch, or another class of witch called Manggagayuma. The tenth was known as Sonat, which was the equivalent of a preacher. It was his task to help a person die. The 11th was the Pangatahuan, who was a soothsayer and a predictor of the future. The 12th was the Bayuguan, who was signified as a Kotkuyan.
All the various kinds of inferior ministers were therefore, as was stated, katulunan, sunat, mangunguway, manyisalat, mankukulam, pukluban, silagan, magtatangal, uswang, mangangayuma, at pangatahuhan. The belief of death and other associated rituals. Their manner of burying the dead was as follows. The deceased was buried beside his house. If he were a chief, he was placed beneath a little house of porch which they constructed for this purpose. The Iitas or Negritos, who were inhabitants of the island, had also a form of burial but different. They dug a deep, perpendicular hole and placed the deceased within it, leaving him upright with head and crown unburied. This infidel says that they knew that there was another life of rest which they called Makkah, just as if we should say paradise, or in other words, village of rest. They say that those who go to this place are the just and the valiant, and those who live without doing harm, or who possesses other moral virtues.
Lesson 2. Kartilya ng Katipunan. The colonial period was the harsh phenomenon that compelled an opportunity for the Filipino to act in solidarity towards sovereignty. It was the regime which caused Andres Bonifacio to organize the Katipunan on July 7, 1892. Obliged by the defunct of Rizal's La Liga Filipina and the absence of hope to make option in order to achieve the freedom dreamed by the whole nation. With the hope of instilling order and respect among its members, the Katipunan introduced a set of guiding principles and teachings. To its author Emilio Jacinto, what was important for its members was the cognizance of katuwiran and kaliwanagan. The existence of the Kartilya proved the correctitude and adherence of the Filipinos to established principles and their merit for the regard of humanity. The author and his background. Ever since the authorship of Cartilla has been ascribed to Emilio Jacinto, the young advisor of Andres Bonifacio and the so-called brain of Katipunan. Due to his brilliance, he rose from the position of fiscal to the rank of general in the underground movement. Under the leadership of Supremo, he served as intelligence director in the assault made in San Juan del Monte. In August 30, 1896, in order to seize a Spanish garrison in the area, his friendship with Bonifacio allowed him to naturally provide the latter with weapons and ammunition, money, printing materials, and artistic creations. In spite of his failure to finish a university degree, Emilio Jacinto was a man of intellect, refinement, and literary indulgence. He wrote Liwanag at Dilim, which contains some essays about his political and social philosophies. Included in this collection were the essays sa Anak ng Bayan, Ang Ningning at ang Liwanag, Kalayaan, Ang Tao'y Magkakapantay, Ang Bayan at ang Mga Pinuno, and Ang Maling Pagsasampalataya. In the hill of Mahayhay, Laguna, where he set up his secret headquarters, he contracted malaria which became the cause of his death. On April 6, 1899, at the age of 24.
Cartilla ng Katipunan. The Cartilla is a primary source which contains the oath and orders that the Katipuneros had to follow. According to the British scholar Jim Richardson on 2013, the Cartilla was sold at 4 kwalta per copy, although it was not clear whether the members were responsible for the payment of their respective chapters. Richardson suspects that the Cartilla was still used at the time of the revolution against the United States as evidenced by its version in the Philippines insurgent records. Bearing the seal used by General Artemio Ricaporte in 1899, Richardson also relates the story that Emilio Jacinto's Cartilla was sent as superior by Andres Bonifacio, who had intended of his decalogue to be published and distributed to the new members. The two documents he possessed, however, are different from one another because Jacinto's Cartilla expounded aspirations and moral values while that of Bonifacio enumerated the duties of the Katipuneros. Richardson also claims that the Cartilla took influence from the declaration used by the Masonic lodges in Manila, following a declaration which is believed to have been written in Spain, and resembles certain parts or aspects. The statement of purpose of the Cartilla, for instance, can be identified as an imitation from the other, including the ideal on the equality of man and woman. The Cartilla resonated the teaching of discipline, virtue, and morals to individuals who wish to join the secret society. It established a foundation that would govern the affairs of the Katipunan and its members. Anyone who violated the teachings would be punished in accordance with the gradation of the offense. Write a reflection paper on the relevance of the Cartilla ng Katipunan towards the realization of the nations. For me, as I have learned that the Cartilla ng Katipunan is the source of oaths and order that the Katipuneros should follow. According to Jim Richardson, the Cartilla took the influence from the declaration used by the Masonic lodges in Manila. I also noticed that Cartilla resonated as a teaching discipline, virtue, and morals of individuals who wish to join the secret society. Anyone who violated the teaching would be punished in accordance with the gradation of the offense. Richardson suspects that the Cartilla was still used at the time of the renovations against the United States as coordinated by its version in the Philippines insurgent record. As a student, I am glad and thankful that I've never experienced this kind of situation, and I am very proud of those people who experience this because they are so brave to face this, and they are strong enough to carry all the burdens happening before.
Here's the learning outcomes. Explain the need of the Kartilya for the members of the Katipunan. Kartilya ng Katipunan is a set of principles that shows the path on how each and every one of us must live of lives by living to the fullest through good values. The Kartilya ng Katipunan was made to change the thoughts of every Filipino's unacceptable behavior. Recognize the relevance of the Kartilya as an ethical moral guide to the Filipinos then and now. The ethical moral of Kartilya ng Katipunan are rectitude, honor, self-sacrifice, faith in God, service to country, fellow men, family, equality, fairness, justice, and respect for women.
Proclamation of Philippine Independence. Ambrosio Rienzares Bautista, also known as Don Busyong. He was a lawyer and distant relative of Dr. Jose Rizal, an author of the Declaration of Philippine Independence, an advisor of Dr. Jose Rizal, a Filipino nationalist who was studying in Manila. The Philippine Declaration of Independence, or in Filipino, pagpapahayag ng kasarinlan ng Pilipinas, in Spanish, Declaration de Independencia de Filipinas, was proclaimed by a Filipino Revolutionary Forces General Emilio Aguinaldo on June 12, 1898 in Cavite El Viejo, or a present-day Kawit Cavite in Philippines. Macapagal said the proclamation of Philippine independence on June 12, 1898 gave colonial Asia its first free and united nation. Because of our Filipino nationalist Emilio Aguinaldo, people in the Philippines have certain unalienable rights including life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. Individuals have civic duty to defend their rights for themselves and to others. That's why Philippines had democracy. Emilio Aguinaldo was not died on the battlefield. He was died, or cause of his death is an heart attack, not because he was slain, not because he was scored to do so, but he taught us that before we get our freedom, there's a blood spotted in the ground. There's a life lost in the battlefield. There's a sacrifice story back its book. And that's what the history is a treasure for us nowadays. Emilio Aguinaldo had a dream too. He was dreaming of the land that's not being colonialized, not being terrorized by the other country. He was dreaming of peace of a Filipino people. So he did his best as a president to become the Philippines back its freedom and gain the democratic way.
3.2 Understand the key issues concerning the Declaration of Philippine Independence. The most significant achievement of Aguinaldo's dictatorial government was the proclamation of Philippine independence in Kawit, Cavite on June 12, 1898. The day has been designated as a national holiday. Thousands of people from the surrounding provinces flocked to Kawit to witness the historic event. The solemn ceremony was held in the balcony of General Emilio Aguinaldo's residence. The government's military and civil officials were present. The formal unfurling of the Filipino flag amid applause was a dramatic feature of the ceremony. The band also played the Philippine national anthem at the same time. Ambrosio Rienzares Bautista III solemnly read his own act of Declaration of Independence. 98 people signed the declaration. L.M. Johnson, Colonel of Artillery, was one of the signers. With a functioning government, Aguinaldo believed it was necessary to declare the Philippine independence. He believed that such a move will inspire the people to fight more zealously against the Spaniards while also leading while also leading foreign countries to recognize their country's independence. Mabini, who had been Aguinaldo's unofficial advisor by this point, objected. He argued that it was more important to reorganize the government in order to persuade foreign powers of the new government's competence and stability than to declare Philippine independence at such an early date. Aguinaldo, on the other hand, stood firm and won. In conclusion, the independence of the Philippines is important to us because it fosters self-esteem and confidence, as well as motivation and perseverance in school. It promotes self-reliance, giving a child a sense of control over their life. Also, that is the only thing we could do to show the country's sovereignty by instilling nationalism in its citizen and celebrating its people, culture, and tradition. That's all. Thank you.
Lesson 4. The Malolos Constitution and the First Republic. Introduction. The Malolos Constitution establishing the First Philippine Republic was proclaimed on January 23, 1899 in Bulacan. Followed the reading of the Constitution, article by article, and order that it be maintained, obey, and carry out in its entirety because it is the Filipino people's sovereign will. Aguinaldo forwarded a copy of the Constitution to the military governor, General Otis, with the remark that the people had adopted the type of government most compatible with their ambitions. To be understood, this constitution must be viewed in the context of the Philippines' history. Centuries of Spanish rule, agencies against Spain's authority and her bad government, and later against the United States. Assumptions of sovereignty, and the gradually increasing sense of nationality which nourish in the blood of martyrdom, grow into a common and ardent desire for independence. Unfortunately, the Malolos Constitution embodied the desire and capacity of the Filipinos to establish a government of the people. The Constitution adopted the principles from the Constitution of Cuba, Mexico, Belgium, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Brazil, and France. The Constitution ventured in applying democracy in its early stage. A government was formed with the intention of being popular, representative, and accountable. Article 1. The political association of all Filipinos constitute a nation. Those states shall be known as a Philippine Republic. The first Republican Constitution in Asia was drafted and adopted by the First Philippine Republic, which lasts from 1899 to 1901. During the American occupation, the Philippines was governed by the laws of the United States of America. Organic acts were passed by the United States Congress for the administration of the government of the Philippine Islands. The first was the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, which provided for a Philippine Assembly composed of Filipino citizens. Article 2. The Philippine Republic is free and independent. The Philippines renounces war as an instrument of national policy, adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of a law and of the land of address to the policy of peace, equality, justice, freedom, cooperation, and amenity with all nations.
Article 3. Sovereignty resides exclusively in the people. Sovereignty is a political concept that refers to the dominant power or supreme authority. In a monarchy, Supreme power resides in the sovereign or king. In modern democracies, sovereign power rests with the people and is exercised through representative bodies such as Congress or Parliament. The Malulus Congress. Emilio Aguinaldo issued a decree on July 18, 1898, asking for the election of delegates to the Revolutionary Congress. Another decree was promulgated 5 days later, which declared that Aguinaldo would appoint representatives of Congress, because holding elections is not practical at that time. He appointed 50 delegates in all, but this number fluctuated from time to time. In accordance with these two decrees, Aguinaldo assembled the Revolutionary Congress at the Brusoin Church in Malolos, Bulacan on September 15, 1898. The First Republic. Though short-lived, the First Philippine nonetheless catapulted the Filipino nation onto the world's consciousness, carving not only a place among the family of nations but also a distinct niche as the first republic in Asia. While much of the world was oblivious to its birthing, the First Republic proved that Filipinos were capable of self-rule and deserved their long-for freedom after more than 300 years of colonial bondage, a bondage shaken time and again by sporadic revolts whose desperateness precluded ultimate victory. After the failure of the reformist movement led by Rizal and Del Pilar, and less than 1896-98 Philippine Revolution culminated with the inauguration of the Republic on January 23, 1899 at Barazoin Church in Malolos, Bulacan. Though besieged and eventually warred by the United States Army, the Republic had earned the loyalty of the Filipino people and deserved the recognition of foreign nations. The summary of the Malolos Constitution and the First Republic. The Constitution specifically provided for safeguards against abuses and enumerated the national and individual rights not only of the Filipinos and of the aliens. The legislative powers were exercised by the Assembly of Representatives, composed of delegates elected according to law. The First Republic traces its origins to the Revolution of 1896, which began under the leadership of the Katipunan, a secret society with a structure patterned after the Freemasonry, and which aimed to attain independence of the Philippines.
Lesson 5. Visual Sources in the Study of Philippine History. Reading and understanding visual sources in history through it is not only forbade upon what a historian wants to understand and interpret based on mere speculations and unwarranted ideas. For instance, it is precarious to imagine that a picture entails power relationship or colonial differences between culture groups which are perceived to be unequal varying unless there is a hard evidence that guarantees the claim. By hard evidence, it is meant that there is a tangible proof that provides fact. Those facts should elicit connection between the visual sources and the interpretation as they guide the course of towards such an interpretation. Hence, the historical should be properly equipped with the know-how on the examination of visual sources, photographs, paintings, cartoons, and video documentaries. Basic guide on how to examine photographics, painting, cartoons, and video documentaries nowadays. The no documents, no history is no longer convincing as there are tangible and intangible sources of data. This is also the reason why history as a discipline depends on archaeology, anthropology, and the allied social sciences. Of the two, the tangible kind of sources is usually easier to consider and examine because of its vivid presentation or enunciation of past idea and realities. This presentation is called historiopathy.
How should a historian examine a photograph, painting, cartoon, or a video documentary then? Examining each form of the source is not exactly done and housed to others and scrutinized. And since the visual sources that are used in history cannot interpret themselves the way their creators clearly can, it is important to accurately find out the ideals and realities they represent in order to not misinform the reading public. The following points are the common grounding through which the aforementioned visual sources can be examined. On the one question of subject, it is important to know the subject of the visual source. The subject pertains to what the visual source is all about. What is equally important is the source shows its subject literally or through a subtext or consolidated meaning. To situate it is in its proper historical standpoint. The period or date when the source was created must be determined. It must be remembered that the period or date served as the initial determinant of the material as a primary source or not. After identifying the subject, the historian of his founder ended the source contribute or better is understanding of its period. On the question of facts, when the historian invokes the word fact, what it means is a piece of information which cannot be disputed by available sources. A factual piece of information therefore leaves no room, no doubt, and leaves no room or uncertainty, which when a black and white photograph which was taken in the late 19th century or the early years of the America.
American era was also the time when artists went through financially lean years. Unfortunately, graphic artworks in the press put a bit more rice on their plates. The cartoons were the artist's response to the times. The author of the book, Alfred W. McCoy, is an American historian who currently teaches at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He finished his BE in European History from Columbia University, MA in Asian Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, and PhD in Southeast Asian History at Yale University. Among his notable scholarship are In the Shadows of American Century, The Rise and Decline of U.S. Global Power at 2017, Bear of Broadway Fame, The Pale of Family and Their Brooklyn Beverly at 2016. Torture and Impunity, the U.S. Doctrine of Coercive Interrogation at 2012, Endless Empire, Spain's Retreat, Europeans Eclipse, America's Decline at 2012, Policing America's Empire, the United States, the Philippines, and the Rise of the Surveillance States at 2009, and an Anarchy of Families, State, and Family in the Philippines at 2009. Dr. McCoy has written intensively on the Philippines and Southeast Asia. He got interested on the theme of the book when he was doing his dissertation. In a span of 10 years, he collected copies of those cartoons from original copies stored in the Library of Congress of the United States, the Australian National Library, the National Library of the Philippines, and other institutions at McCoy and Ross's 1985. Alfredo Roses was the editor-in-chief of the 10-volume Filipino Heritage. He also authored some books which include Amarsulo, 1892 to 1972, at 1975, Looking for Liling, A Family History of World War II, Martyred, at 2000, Medals and Shoes, at co-authored with Irene Roses, 1992, Cultured Shock, at co-authored with Grace Roses, 1992, Drawing, at 1975. His interest on Philippine graphics started in his childhood. He introduced co-author Alfred McCoy to his personal collection of Lipag Kalabaw. He earned his Bachelor in Fine Arts degree from Notre Dame University in India, USA. He also wrote numerous articles on Philippine arts and letters and designed the logo of the Cultural Center of the Philippines. Alfredo Roses was the recipient of the prestigious 10 Outstanding Young Men Award in 1961, Journalist of the Year Award in 1971 from the Citizens Councils for Mass Media, and Arts of the Year Award from the Art Association of the Philippines in 1972. The, the book contains cartoons from various dailies that totally ridiculed the transformation of the country, especially its capital city. On certain respect, it conveys how the Filipino politician has become arrogant and abusive to the power base in them. The city of Manila, for example, was depicted by political cartoons as a classic example of haven for political dynasty abuse and corruption. While the social practices in Manila were changing as the result of retrofitting to conform it to the ways of the new colonizers, the province were the object of satirical presentation. Newspaper cartoons depicted the appalling situation of the peasants, their battles cries from their landlords, the prevalence of illegal activities, and the snobbish and condescending attitude of returning students from Manila.
The Chinese when anti-Japanese sentiments grow because of the alarming threat posed by the Japanese in Northeast Asia and their subsequent annexation of Manchuria. The dynamic of Philippine politics was tackled in the book. The Jones Law of 1916 added turbulence in the political sense by establishing the Philippines Senate that would email more competition and bickering to the would already conversity-infested Philippines Assembly. Apart from the hullabaloo of local politics, the principal figures of national politics were highly involved in the key issues. Manuel Luis M. Quezon and Sergio S. Osmeña Sr. become the subject of lampoons because of their insatiable involvement in independence mission. The Partido Nacionalista was split into the two factions and later on Osmeña was cunningly defended by Quezon through the latter tendence McPhee Act. Semi-independent nation, the experimentation or worthlessness of certain public officials were more and more evident. The free press as much become intense of its portrayals of the idiosyncrasy. It described in true cartoons as theater of public interest as then influencers of the people. The political converses did not include the merciless spin of the cartoonists until the means of Japanese advancement in northern China. During the turbulent and apparent stable times in the America period, cartoon becomes effective avenues in expressing public opinions. The cartoonist's sardonic presentation of key issues were critical commentaries on the phenomena brought by American occupational, exploitative or worthless creature of Philippines officials and the challenges brought about by other foreigners as the Chinese and the Japanese. The harsh judgments of the cartoonists evoke a fully developed since the nationalism which aimed at a better country of the Filipinos. The paintings of Juan Luna and Fernando Amorsolo. Juan Luna is remembered because of his Parisian life and his monumental masterpiece Espolarium. He was born in Bodo, Ilocos Norte. In 1857, he took a Bachelor of Arts in Ateneo Municipal. His initial training in arts took place under the supervision of Spanish painter Agustin Says. Later on, he became a seafarer after studying navigation of high seas and the Academia Nautica in the Manila, which he eventually gave up in order to pursue a career in arts. Filipino in History, 1990, he became an apprentice to the Filipino painter Lorenzo Guarrillo, the Academia de Bello Pintura in 1877. He traveled to Spain and continued his studies to the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, Museo, to continue his studies in fine arts. The city government, Manila agreed to fund his studies abroad with a condition that will not send his historical paintings every year so that the agreemento would be able to increase its collection of masterpieces Filipino in History 1990. Back in Spain, he traveled in many European cities in order to gain insight from the painting display in their museum, and then he would become ultimately a master of the brush that he would produce such masterpiece and La Muerte de la Cleopatra, The Death of Cleopatra, España y Filipinas, Spain of the Philippines, the Balota de Lepanto, the Battle of Lepanto, People of Road, People of King, the El Pacto of Sangre, the Blood Compact, among others, his La Bala de Lepanto, which won a gold medal in Barcelona Exposition of 1888, and considered his greatest masterpiece, captured the administration. Fernando Amorsolo is one of the Filipino painters known for landscape and historical masterpieces, including paintings about women in the rural areas and portraits of influential individuals. He was named Nation Artist in Paintings in 1972 for the countless masterpieces he created. He was born in Manila in 1892 and studied at an art school named Cleo de Manila in 1909. He also enrolled the School of Fine Arts and University of the Philippines, which he finished with honor in 1914. While a student at the University of Marcelo, did sketches of publication just to earn money. After his graduation, he joined the Bureau of Public Works as draftman and later at the Sepik Commercial Company, where he served as its chief artist. Because of his unusual brilliance, he became a part-time instructor in his alma mater in the succeeding 3 years before he would go to Spain and study at the Academia de San Fernando in Madrid. Through this study grant, he was able to go to New York. There he learned Cubism and Impressionism, which would become the movements that would influence his painting later on. The bombing of the Intifada of burning of Manila.
Lesson 6, Readers of the Solusi, a documentary presentation. Introduction. As described by the Spaniards, Kirkai in the area surrounding the Sulu was prominent until the 19th century. As a result, the colonial government attempted to subdue Mindanao. It was in the middle of the century when the Spanish continually engaged the Muslim, who they called Moros, in order to stop the latter illegal acts. One striking battle took place in 1848 when the Spaniards sent the expedition of Balangege through a fleet of small warship commanded by General Jose Ruiz. The Spaniards failed to reveal the Moro piracy which existed at the beginning of the 20th century. A historiography documentary film focusing in Zamboanga City depicting how Spaniards defended the city with the Fort Pilar as Spain's last stronghold and bastion of defense and economic expansion in the south of the Philippines. It depicts the Southeast Asian flourishing free trading in the area and the adverse effects and repercussions when Europeans such as the English, Dutch, and Spanish who wanted to control the economy will colonize and Christianize. The documentary centers on the activity of the slave raiders as a way retaliation to the colonizer and a way to defend their weight of their life against of oppression. The Sulu and Maguindanao sultanates were when the two kingdoms controlling the Muslim colonies of southern Philippines. With the king of Maguindanao, Raja Dalasi at the helm, they launched a bloody attack on Fort Place Pilar. Background of the film. The Raiders of the Sulu Sea is a documentary film produced by Lim Swat Yen, Zanetta Zakaria, and Yen Kwaz Kim. Other producers include the Wak Oak film based in Singapore for Q Channel, as well as the Discovery Channel, National Geographic Channel for international releases. It was directed by Edswan Othman, was originally related in 2008. It was subsequently produced by a Looking Glass International based on Victoria, Australia in 2013.
In coming up with the film production team sought the assistance of the following contribution: Isel Gloria Borja Estrada, who is considered as Zamboanga City's premier artist, working as a painter and sculptor. She always worked as an executive assistant in the office of the city mayors with the task of overlooking the city hall restoration. Dr. Samuel Quitan, who is regarded as foremost authority on the Filipino Muslim history. He served as chairperson of the National Historical Institute and focused most of his studies in understanding the history and culture of the Muslim in the Philippines. Dr. Barbara Watson Andaya, who is professor of Asian Studies to the University of Hawaii and director of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies. Her career has involved teaching and teaching in Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, the Netherlands, and since 1994, Hawaii. She maintains an active teaching and research interest across all Southeast Asia, but her specific area of expertise in the Western Malay Indonesia archipelago. Dr. Julius Bautista, who is an associate professor at Kyoto University. His research interests include the anthropology of religion, pedagogy, the Southeast Asian culture and history, especially the Philippine and Timor-Leste. Dr. Margarita Coanco, who is known for her work in helping Muslim communities. She did a research on the history of Sama in the Sulu archipelago. Mr. Halman Abubakar, who served as municipal councilor in Hulu at the time of the filming of the documentary. Atausog deserved from Sulu. He is an expert on the martial arts of Selat, which uses significant and historic Tausug-blooded weapon. Spanish accounts of the era narrated the ship utilized by the Muslim and the riding activist weight, Zuanga Lanog. These were large ships that measured around 24 to 27 meters long with wide hull and wide keel for stability. It used the 3 large cloth cells that was collapsed. It had cannons mounted at the bow and could carry around 100 to 150 men, including a master or captain, a steersman, warrior sailor, as well as slave to serve as oarsmen. Garay. As compared to the Zuangas, these vessels were smaller but known for their fastness and maneuverability. These were principally used by the Samals and were built from bamboo, wood, and nipa palm. salipsipan. These were considered as support vessels and were designed primarily to access littoral and shallow water conditions. The raiders would usually hide to their bigger vessels by using these ships. They pretended as fishermen so that they could not draw the attention of their target captives and could convince them they are harmless. On the other hand, the weapon that Muslims used in the raiding activities include the following. Barong. These were single-bladed weapons made of thick tempered steel and measure at approximately 1 meter long. The Muslim would prefer this during a close hand-to-hand battle. Kris or kalals. These weapons were used either for warfare or as a ceremonial symbol. It was unique because it was a double-edged sword that was either smooth or wavy. It was dreadful and savage weapon since it did not only stab the opponent, rather it slashed the flesh and penetrated it, leaving most of the time a fatal result. The nobles and the other high-ranking Muslim officials would usually use this weapon, kampelan. These weapons were primarily used by the Lanons and were much longer and heavier than previous two words. Body armor. Wealthy Muslims used bodily armors that were made from carabao, ham, or steel which, in turn, were molded to fit the body. Different group of Muslims that identified during the colonial times. Balaningi Samals that occupy the chain of islands between the Basilan and Sulu Islands. Elanons considered as the most important and presary history. Tausug, dominant ethnic group, the Sulu archipelago.